A 73-year-old Navy veteran named Jack Rowden is quietly pushed out of his lifelong fishing spot when a private resort buys up the local lakefront in his small Minnesota town. After a viral video of his mistreatment spreads online, fellow veterans and townspeople rally behind him, uncovering a forgotten contract granting him lifetime access. With national attention and community support, the dock is renamed Rowden's Landing, becoming a symbol of quiet resistance, local memory, and the enduring bond between people and place. Welcome to my channel. My name's Jack Rowden. I'm 73 years old, and I've lived my whole life in the lakeside town of Elmbrook, nestled deep in northern Minnesota. Folks around here used to say I was part of the lake, and honestly, I believed them. I could tell the depth by the way the mist rose off it. I knew the fish by the time they came to feed and the wind by its scent before the clouds even rolled in. I'm a Navy man, or was. Spent the better part of my younger years out on the Pacific, running supply chains and listening to the creak of metal hulls under salt air. When I came back home in '78, I traded ocean waves for freshwater ripples and settled into the rhythm of Elmbrook's small-town quiet. Every morning for 4 decades, I rowed out in my skiff before dawn. Not for profit, not even for the sport. I fished to feed. Folks who couldn't put food on their tables, seniors who couldn't leave the house, the soup kitchen over at St. Agnes, they all counted on my catch. It was the kind of work that didn't make headlines but made a difference, and that was enough for me. Elmbrook's changed. The sawmills shut down. The bait shops turned into smoothie bars. Outsiders came with their kayaks and yoga mats, and downtown started looking more like an Instagram feed than a place where people lived and died and got married in the same churches their parents did. But I didn't change. I wore my faded USS Hartford ball cap like armor, my hands calloused and familiar with rope and hook. My truck still rattled like a coin in a tin can, and the dock at Birch Point still held my weight like an old friend. That is, until the Tuesday everything shifted. It was cold that morning, early October. The kind of cold that bites through your flannel and whispers the promise of snow. I parked in my usual spot near the lake, thermos in one hand, tackle box in the other. I adjusted my cap, nodded toward the water like always, and started down the dock, same as I had for 40 years. Only this time, a voice stopped me. "Sir, this is private property now. You're going to need to leave." I turned, half expecting a prank. But there he was, a young guy in a shiny new uniform with the logo of some resort company embroidered on his chest. Palisade Retreat, it read. Never heard of it until that moment, but I felt its presence in my bones. "I've been fishing here since before your badge was sewn on that shirt," I told him, calm as a sleeping dog. "This is public lakefront." "Not anymore," he replied, arms folded like he practiced that pose in a mirror. "The land's been sold. You're trespassing." I pulled a laminated card from my coat. Old, frayed, but still legible. Years back, Mayor Watkins himself signed off on it, granted me permanent fishing rights for community contribution, the kind of thing towns used to value. The kid didn't even read it. Snatched it from my hand and ripped it in two. "This doesn't mean anything now," he said, voice loud for the onlookers starting to gather. I remember reaching for my rod, leaning it against the railing. But the kid, he shoved me. I stumbled. The rod hit the planks with a crack. Snapped clean in half. That rod, Margie gave it to me on our last anniversary before she passed. It was more than just wood and line. It was part of her. Part of us. And there I was, on my knees, picking up splinters of a memory while joggers watched. No one said a thing. Just phones in hand. Whispered comments. One guy said something about squatting on prime real estate. I didn't speak. Just tucked the broken rod under my arm and walked back to my truck. Behind me, the guard was planting a bright red sign. "No fishing. Private property." I didn't cry. I didn't shout. But something in me folded that morning, folded like the card I used to carry. Like a flag after a burial. And from the shore, as the sun lit up the water one last time, I could see the bulldozers rolling in. I didn't go near the lake for the next couple days. Couldn't bring myself to. I sat on my porch with a mug of black coffee and watched the treetops sway instead. Same view, different weight in my chest. On the third day, I opened the cedar trunk in my living room. It holds the things I've kept close when everything else slipped away. Inside was the flag from Margaret's funeral, triangular and precise, still holding her scent somehow. Next to it, my Navy insignia. And beneath that, a photo from 1972, me and the boys on the deck of the USS Hartford, grinning like fools in that Philippine heat before the storm rolled in. We lost a lot of good men in that typhoon. But I remember every face. I remember pulling Seaman Rourke from the cable deck with one arm and hanging onto the hull with the other. Funny how, when everything's crashing around you, the things you hold on to get burned into your bones. I placed the broken rod gently beside the flag and sat for a long time, feeling the years like a weight. I wasn't angry, just hollowed out. That night, I wrote in my journal. I've kept one since the Navy, just a habit I never kicked. That entry read, Day 14 since being barred from Birch Point. The lake used to know me. Now it looks right through me. My daughter, Ellie, called again. Lives down in Mesa, Arizona. She's been asking me for months to move closer to her. Says there's a place for retired servicemen with good health care and good weather. But it's a box on the desert floor, and I'm a tree rooted in northern soil. This town isn't yours anymore, Dad, she said gently, like trying to move a sleeping dog off a porch. You're holding on to something that's already gone. But I couldn't explain what the lake meant to me, how its tides beat in time with my own heart. It wasn't just water, it was memory, it was rhythm, it was life. A few days later, I found out I was famous or infamous, depending who you ask. Someone had uploaded that doc confrontation to the internet. Not with sympathy, no. They slapped music over it, banjos or circus themes, I can't recall, and gave it a name like Old Man Yells at Lake. The comments were worse than the video. Boomer tears. Move aside, Grandpa. Let the future in. Probably never paid property tax in his life. It felt like drowning slowly. Not in water, but in ridicule. But then came a knock. I opened the door to find Bill Langston, the guy who still runs the hardware store over on Main Street. One of the last holdouts like me. He looked tired. Everyone does these days. Jack, I saw what happened. Damn shame, he said, taking the coffee I offered him. They're talking about turning the whole shoreline into a members-only retreat. Gated docks. Privately patrolled. They own the land, I said, voice flat. Yeah, he sighed. But they don't own our memory of it. He stayed for an hour. Talked about how most of the original families were gone now. The people who remembered what Elmbrook used to be, how it smelled after rain, the way the lake froze smooth enough to skate on clear through January. They'd either passed or sold and left. They're calling it progress, he added, not hiding the bitterness in his voice. After he left, I stood out on my porch until night came. The stars were out, but the shoreline was lit up with harsh security lights now, washing out the constellations. I could hear the lake still, but it felt like it had turned its back on me. Later, my phone buzzed again. Ellie. She was quieter this time. They sent me the video. Dad, she said. Is this what you've been dealing with? I'm fine, I lied. She paused. They don't deserve you, she said, her voice cracking just a little. They've forgotten who built this town. Maybe she was right. Maybe Elmbrook had changed so much that I was the ghost now, haunting the shoreline. But I wasn't ready to be exorcised. Not yet. The morning after that call from Ellie, I stood on my porch and watched the lake through my binoculars like I used to watch enemy coastlines. It was instinct more than intention, scanning for movement, for shifts in rhythm. Old habits. The water was the same, but everything else had changed. Signs dotted the shoreline now, freshly staked, professionally printed, private property, no trespassing, members only. Birch Point looked less like a public dock and more like a checkpoint. There were even cameras. Cameras on trees. I couldn't wrap my head around that. When did peace become something you had to pay to access? I poured myself another cup of black coffee and sat in the creaky lawn chair that had outlived 3 neighbors and 1 dog. That's when I saw it. An envelope wedged into my screen door. No postage. Hand-delivered. It was a flyer, neatly folded. Palisade Retreat Resort and Spa. Grand opening celebration. There were images of wine glasses, yoga circles, and people on paddleboards who had probably never baited a hook in their lives. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. A place I used to fish for free was now being sold as an exclusive escape for the discerning adventurer. A couple days passed. I kept to myself. Stared at the lake. Thought too much. The video kept spreading, racking up more views than I was comfortable with. I had become a meme, a symbol, something to be mocked or pitted. Never asked. Never understood. Then came a Sunday morning I'll never forget. Same routine. Wake at 5:30, coffee, chair. But just as the horizon turned that dusty shade of gold, I heard something I hadn't heard in years. Engines. Not the soft purr of pontoon boats or the electric hum of a kayak rental, but the deep-throated rumble of military crafts, rigid hull inflatables, 8 of them, moving in tight formation from the far side of the lake. They cut through the mist like phantoms. I stood up, my knees complaining as usual, and watched. Each boat flew an American flag. My stomach tightened. I hadn't seen that kind of entry since exercises out of Yokosuka in '74. They weren't coming to fish. They were coming for something else. I threw on my coat and headed for the lake. I moved faster than I had in weeks. Past the trailhead, through the pines, down the worn path that led to Birch Point. When I reached the dock, the guards were already scrambling. Radios buzzing. Tourists frozen mid-jog. A couple folks recording on their phones again, but this time, their eyes were wide with curiosity, not mockery. The first boat docked with precision, and a tall man in formal Navy dress stepped out. His hair was silver, his posture ramrod straight. I knew that walk before he said a word. "Chief Rowden," he called, scanning the crowd until his eyes locked with mine. "Colonel Wexler?" I asked, stunned. He nodded, then turned to the gathering crowd. "My name is Colonel Nathan Wexler, United States Navy, retired," he said. His voice carried like thunder on still water. 40 years ago, Chief Petty Officer Jack Rowden saved my life during a typhoon off the coast of Luzon. He pulled me from a flooding engine room with 2 broken ribs and a punctured lung. I survived because he held fast when everything else gave way. The crowd shifted. Phones were still out, but no one was laughing now. And when he came home, Wexler continued. He kept serving, feeding his community, monitoring these waters for the EPA, teaching children how to fish, how to respect the land. Another man stepped from a second boat, younger, in uniform. "Lieutenant Commander David Rios," he said. "My father was one of those children. Jack taught him to fish, and that saved his life in more ways than one. My dad grew up poor. No father. Jack was his first role model." There was murmuring now, questions. And then, from a third boat, a woman emerged. Civilian suit, Department of the Interior badge on her lapel. "This lake," she announced, "was sold in violation of the Historical Waterways Act. It has documented ties to the Dakota and Ojibwe tribes and is subject to federal review. As of this morning, all development is suspended pending investigation." The Palisade guard who had ripped up my permit looked like he'd swallowed a wasp. Then came the moment that hit hardest. One of the sailors approached him, same one who had been filming before, and handed him a paper. "A copy of your revoked permit?" I asked, confused. He shook his head. "No, sir," he replied. "This is your original 1984 environmental monitoring contract with the town, signed by Mayor Watkins. Still valid. Federally recognized. Grants you lifetime access to Birch Point for the purpose of ecological and charitable fishing." I didn't say a word. Couldn't. My hands shook, just a little, as I folded the paper along crisp, military lines. Honor Guard sailors formed 2 rows, lining the dock I'd been banned from. And Colonel Wexler turned to me. "You didn't call us, Jack," he said, quieter now. "But someone did. Someone saw the video, and word got around. Veterans don't forget their own." I stepped forward, my boots touching those familiar planks again for the first time in weeks. I could feel Margie's hand in mine, the warmth of her last anniversary gift, the years pressed into the grain of the wood beneath my feet. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I didn't want to make a speech. Never did. Public speaking's for people who need to convince others. I wasn't there to convince. I was there to remember, to reclaim. So I walked past the honor guard, past the stunned faces of tourists and joggers and Palisade executives in their overpriced fleece vests, and I stood at the edge of the dock where I'd always fished. My spot. Mine. In a way deeds and ownership papers could never touch. Colonel Wexler followed me, but he kept his distance, understanding that some moments are meant to be solitary. I reached into my truck. The old girl was still rumbling on the hill behind us, and pulled out my spare rod. Not the broken one. That stayed on my mantel next to the flag. This rod was older, stiffer, a little warped, but still good. Still faithful. With slow, deliberate hands, I baited the hook, cast the line, and sat. For a long while, no one said anything. Then the sailors joined me. One by one, in their dress uniforms, they sat along the dock. No rods. No fanfare. Just quiet reverence. They didn't need to fish. Their presence was the line cast. The stillness they brought with them was its own kind of bait. The crowd didn't know what to do. Some lowered their phones. Some just stood, hands in pockets, suddenly aware that they were witnessing something they hadn't earned the right to interrupt. Eventually, the mayor showed up, Donovan Tate, who I'd once seen cry in front of the town council when his golden retriever passed. He looked more like a boy than a mayor as he fumbled his way through a makeshift press conference. In recognition of Chief Rowden's contributions, he said, adjusting his tie, the town of Elmbrook will be naming this dock. He cleared his throat, Rowden's Landing, and establishing a permanent veterans access point with protected community fishing rights. He handed me a laminated permit. This one had gold trim, official seals, my name in bold letters. I took it with a nod. Didn't need it, not really. The lake already knew I belonged. After the speeches, the crowd began to thin. Wexler came over, placed a hand on my shoulder. We'll be back, he said. Every month, if we have to. I believed him. The rest of the week was a blur. The story blew up online, a headline after headline. Navy vet reclaims lakefront access. Small town boasts a big honor. Progress versus principle. The Elmbrook story. Reporters called. Veterans wrote letters. And Palisade retreat? Well, they changed their tune. By Friday, they released a statement promising to restructure development plans to honor local heritage. I almost laughed when I read that. Not because it was funny, but because that kind of language only comes from people who just got handed their hats in public. But you know what meant the most? It was the kids. They started showing up every morning. At first, it was curiosity. The man from the video. The guy with the old cap. But curiosity turned into respect. Then into eagerness. Can you show me how to cast like that? A boy asked one morning, watching the perfect arc of my line. How do you know where they're biting? Another whispered like it was a sacred secret. And so, I began teaching. I showed them how to watch the water's skin for ripples, how to listen for birdsong that shifts just before a strike, how to hold still not just their hands, but their breath. Fishing isn't about movement. It's about waiting. About knowing when the world is trying to tell you something. One little girl, maybe 8 or 9, asked me, "Do you talk to the lake?" I chuckled. "No, but I listened to it." She nodded, dead serious. "Me too. God help us. Maybe there's hope yet." The security guard, the one who ripped up my permit, he disappeared. No press release. No statement. But one morning, I found something on my bench. A brand new Navy ball cap. USS Hartford, stitched in clean gold thread. No note. No tag. I didn't put it on. Didn't need to. I already had one, faded and torn in mine. But I placed a hand on that new cap, just for a moment. A silent thank you. Some apologies don't need words. Mayor Tate, trying to make good on his misstep, invited me to join a new Veterans Advisory Council he was forming to help guide future development around town. I told him I wasn't a politician. Neither am I, he replied, which was both true and worrying. I said I'd think about it. Eventually, I did join. Reluctantly. I figured if I could protect even one patch of shoreline for the next generation, it'd be worth the meetings and the coffee that tastes like dishwater. Our first recommendation? Use a portion of tourism revenue to protect public access points. It passed unanimously. Even the Palisade rep voted yes. Things were changing in Elmbrook. Maybe not fast enough. But this time, they were changing in the right direction. A few weeks after the dock was renamed Rowden's Landing, a local craftsman named Jeremy Tibbetts, used to be a student of mine when he was knee-high and eating worms, delivered the sign. Simple. Solid oak. The kind of wood that'll outlive both of us. Carved deep into the grain were the words. Rowden's Landing. Keeper of the waters. No fancy gold leaf. No grand ceremony. Just Jeremy handing it to me in the back of his pickup, his eyes a little shinier than the autumn air justified. "We never forgot you, Jack," he said. I nodded and helped him mount it at the start of the dock. It was a Saturday morning, crisp and bright, and I was just baiting a hook when I noticed 3 kids waiting by the bench. A boy and 2 girls, probably 10 or 11, holding notebooks. "You really lived on a ship?" one asked as they approached. "Sure did," I said. "USS Hartford. She was meaner than a kicked mule and louder than a Sunday preacher, but she kept us afloat." They giggled, then sat cross-legged on the dock. "We're doing a project," one girl explained. "About the lake's history. Miss Doherty said we should ask you." And just like that, I was a museum exhibit. A living archive. And strangely, I didn't mind. I told them about the old fishing derby that used to happen every June, back before the permits and wristbands. How the lake froze smooth enough some winters that we played hockey by moonlight. How, after the flood of '89, I used my skiff to ferry stranded families across Main Street because the water was knee-deep in the post office. They scribbled furiously. One even asked if she could record me on her phone. Only if you promise not to make me go viral again, I joked. That's when I realized the lake had started healing. Not just the water, but the soul of it. The pulse that had been stifled under resort brochures and construction tape was finding its rhythm again. One morning, about 6 months after the Navy had come to town, Colonel Wexler came back. No formal visit. No press. Just showed up with a thermos and a second lawn chair. He didn't talk much. Men like him rarely do. We just sat, side by side, casting into the mist, listening to the world wake up. They're still planning condos on the western shore, he said, almost as an afterthought. I nodded. Progress marches. You gonna fight it? No, I said, reeling in a perch. Not every battle needs a soldier. Some just need a witness. He smiled at that. I think he understood what I meant. It's not that I was giving up. Far from it. I just knew the lake had enough guardians now. People were paying attention. People who had forgotten were starting to remember. Later that day, a young couple approached me. They were newcomers, wearing matching fleece and carrying collapsible hiking poles like they'd just come from a catalog shoot. Are you Jack Rowden? The woman asked, a bit timid. I nodded. You're the man from the video, right? The fishing guy? Depends which video, I said with a smirk. I'm in a few. One's got me cussing out a heron. They laughed nervously. Then the man said, we just wanted to say thank you. We didn't grow up here, but we moved because of what we saw. It made us realize some places are still worth belonging to. That caught me off guard. Belonging. That's what it had always been about. Not ownership. Not control. Just belonging. I told them where the best blueberry bushes were if they didn't mind a little mud. They thanked me and left with a promise to return. After they were gone, I looked out over the water. The sun was just beginning to sink, painting the lake in streaks of gold and amber. A loon called from somewhere beyond the bend, its cry echoing like a memory. The lake was still here, still giving, still patient. And so was I. Spring rolled in quiet and slow, the way it always does up here. The snow didn't so much melt as surrender, one soft edge at a time. The lake stayed half-frozen until mid-April, and then one morning it cracked wide open like a breath being held too long. That's when the school kids came. Turned out one of the girls who'd interviewed me for that lake history project was the daughter of Miss Doherty, the science teacher at Elmbrook Elementary. She'd asked the principal if the school could use Rowden's Landing as a base for a year-long environmental project. Apparently, they were studying freshwater ecosystems. The principal said yes. They asked me to help. At first, I hesitated. Said I wasn't a scientist. Said I was too old. But Miss Doherty just smiled and handed me a stack of the kids' essays. Said I'd inspired half the class to start journaling weather patterns and water clarity in their backyard puddles. So I said yes. Every Tuesday morning, 20 or so fourth graders arrived at the dock, bundled up in jackets 2 sizes too big, notebooks in hand, questions on their tongues. We tested pH levels using simple strips. Took water samples. Identified insects, algae, minnows. I showed them how to read the lake's surface like a mirror for the world beneath. But what I taught most, without even meaning to, was how to wait. Fishing teaches patience, sure. But what most people don't understand is that true waiting isn't just passing time. It's being fully present while time passes through you. The kids didn't get it at first. They fidgeted, complained, checked their watches like stockbrokers. But slowly, they settled. They started watching the wind, listening to the birds, noticing when the sun caught on the ripple of a fish just under the surface. One morning, a boy named Liam asked me, "Why do you come here even when nobody else is around?" I looked out over the water before answering. Because the lake never stops being here, I said. And sometimes, showing up is half the battle. He wrote that down like it was scripture. Not long after, a kid named Josh brought his grandfather to the dock. The old man was a Korean War vet, mostly deaf, but sharp as a tack. We sat on the bench and talked quietly while the kids skittered about with magnifying glasses and jars. My grandson says you're some kind of lake wizard, he joked. I prefer keeper of the waters, I replied, deadpan. He laughed. Said he used to fish the Mississippi as a boy. Said it reminded him of home. Then he pulled out a thermos, poured us both some black coffee. That's how it starts, he said, sipping. Coffee, conversation, connection. He wasn't wrong. Later that week, I got a letter in the mail from a college in Duluth. A professor in their environmental sciences department had heard about the school project. Said they wanted access to the kids' water data. Said it was more consistent and better logged than some of their student work. I forwarded the request to Miss Doherty. She just about fell out of her chair. "You realize what this means?" she asked me. "Sure," I said. "It means I gotta buy more bait. The kids'll be here for a while." By late spring, the dock had become something of a pilgrimage site. Not for tourists, not the kind with selfie sticks and agendas, but for locals. For people who'd been pushed to the edges and were slowly finding their way back. A widow who used to fish with her husband every Sunday brought a lawn chair and just sat beside me for a spell. Didn't say much. Didn't need to. Her eyes said enough. A teenager who'd been suspended for fighting showed up one morning. Asked if I'd teach him to fish. I said only if he promised to teach someone else when the time came. He looked me square in the eyes and said, "Deal." The lake had become more than water. It was reflection. It was revival. And me? I'd become something I never expected. A teacher. Not because I'd studied pedagogy or earned a degree, but because I showed up. Because I listened. Because I remembered what others forgot. By early summer, the western edge of the lake buzzed again. Construction had resumed scaled-down plans, they said. Fewer condos, more community integration. Whatever that meant. From my spot at the dock, I could see the skeletons of modern buildings rising between pine trees. I didn't hate it. I just didn't trust it. Developers wore smiles like armor. They spoke about balance and harmony, but I'd seen what happened when profit met nature. It was never nature that walked away with the deal. Still, I stayed out of it. My fight wasn't with walls and windows, it was with silence. With being forgotten. One morning, I noticed something new. A row of benches, freshly built, just off the eastern path. A plaque on one read, "Dedicated to those who watch and wait." No name. No sponsor. Just a quiet gesture. And that meant more than any headline. Colonel Wexler stopped by again that month. Brought coffee and sat for a while. "They're still trying to rename the Western Inlet," he said, sipping slowly. "Let him," I said. "Names don't stick unless they're earned." He chuckled. "And Rowden's Landing?" I shrugged. That one was carved, not painted. That afternoon, I taught 2 boys how to clean a fish. They wrinkled their noses but stuck with it. Said it was the coolest thing they'd ever done. They left holding fillets wrapped in newspaper and grinning like they'd discovered treasure. That's the thing. Give kids real work, real stories, and they don't just listen. They carry it forward. A few weeks later, a stranger waited for me at the dock. Mid-30s, dressed like a weekend hiker, but there was something too still about him. He wasn't there for the view. "You're Jack Rowden?" he asked. "I am," I said, careful. He reached into his bag, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to me. "My father asked me to deliver this. Said you'd know what it meant." I opened it. Inside was a photo of a much younger me, hauling a wet, exhausted sailor through smoke and spray on the Hartford's deck. Below, a handwritten note. "I never got to thank you. You carried me off that ship and into the rest of my life. My son graduates from the Naval Academy this fall. Because of you. Signed, M. Jennings." I looked up. The young man was smiling softly. "He still talks about you." I didn't know what to say, so I nodded, tucked the photo in my chest pocket, and offered him the other rod. We fished in silence. Later that night, I walked the shoreline under the stars. Fireflies blinked in and out like Morse code. Back at the dock, I found a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a carved wooden lure, a handmade, detailed, beautiful. A note was tied to it, for the keeper. From those still watching. The lake doesn't shout its gratitude. It just whispers it, softly, again and again, if you know how to listen. By early fall, the air had that crispness that made your joints ache and your thoughts sharpen. The school kids had gone back inside. Fewer came to the dock now, but the ones who did stayed longer. They asked better questions. They started noticing things, wind shifts, fish shadows, the feel of weather in their bones. One boy, Lucas, brought me a notebook one morning. Inside were charts, sketches, temperature logs. "You kept this all summer?" I asked. "Since April," he said. "Like you do." He'd even copied the way I note wind direction and sky clarity. "You're a steward now," I told him. He beamed like I'd handed him a medal. Later that week, the town posted an official sign near the parking area. "Protected Community Shoreline, steward by Elmbrook veterans and local elders." I chuckled at that last part, elders. I guess it fits. The developers built their condos. Not all of them, but enough. They stayed across the lake, and most folks didn't mind. Some even came to the dock with their kids, curious, careful. A few sat with me. Quietly. No flash. No agenda. One even said, I thought this was just another lake. But you made it a story. I didn't reply. Just watch the water. That's the gift of staying in one place long enough. You begin to see the chapters others miss. You learn the long view. The first frost arrived in the night. I knew before I stepped outside, could feel it in my knees and the way the air wrapped around the porch like a blanket just out of the freezer. The lake shimmered under a pale sun, mist curling at the edges. My boots crunched on the path as I made my way to the dock, just like every morning. But this time, someone was already there. It was Lucas, the boy with the notebook, sitting in my usual spot, rod in hand, already casting. He saw me and jumped up. Sorry, I waved him down. It's yours now. I'm just a guest. We fished together in silence. His cast was clean. His patience better than most men twice his age. I didn't say much, but he didn't need me to. That's how you know you've passed something on when the next hands don't need holding. As we packed up, he said, Do you think the lake remembers people? I looked out at the still water, at the light skipping off its surface like a stone. I think it remembers what we give it. And how? He nodded, scribbling it down like he always did. Back home, I placed the carved lure back in its cloth. Next to it, the old folded card, the broken rod, the flag, artifacts of a life not meant to be loud, just lasting. The phone rang. Ellie again. How's the lake today? She asked. Same as always, I said. And somehow better. She was quiet for a moment, then said, You think you'll ever leave? I looked out the window, where the trees stood exactly where they've always been. No, I said. Some roots grow too deep for pulling. That evening, I returned to Rowden's Landing one last time before the snow came. No crowd. No cameras. Just me, a thermos, and the sound of water greeting shore. I cast my line. Not because I expected a bite, but because some things, like love, like memory, like duty, deserve to be repeated. Even if no one's watching. Even if it's just to remind the lake that someone is still listening.